So now we've walked through the administrative tasks for working with your site collection and administering it, your site itself and administering it. And now we have one more section to go through as to making sure you are aware of all the things that you need to have for your site. That is working with your libraries and lists themselves. What we're going to do here is we're going to go through and we're going to modify one of your lists and one of your libraries so you can see the similarities and differences between those two, and then kind of talk about what you need to be aware of and what you can actually delegate off to your members as well. Because remember, members that have contribute rights here can go in and work with lists themselves. That means that some of the load can be moved off to them, but also that you're going to have to monitor what's going on with this because things can happen outside of what you're doing. And having a deep understanding of what's going on there can really help you keep from getting in a bad spot or having data lost or corrupted for you. So to begin with, let's start off with our team site. And let's go into our site contents. And let's add just a clean list. We've got a custom list already, but let's start with something that's actually got a little bit of information for us. Probably let's go with the task list. We'll do our My Custom Task and create it. And now we've got our list here. Note that the My Custom Task, the list itself, has a custom view up on the top. It's actually got an ability to add the task with dates to the timeline. It's got our ability to add directly a new task or edit the list. These are all common ways that you can actually work with your lists. But in SharePoint 2013, with the new ribbon capabilities inside of SharePoint, we're in our Browse view, but we can actually go look at our tasks and have some help along there with what we're doing. Or we can actually go into the list itself and see what we can do to modify this. We can actually we've got our view format disabled because we're actually in that. We've got our quick edit, which lets us edit list items using a spreadsheet format. We're not going to go into that just yet. We can create a view, and we're going to come back to that in just a second, or modify an existing view, create columns, and we've actually got our current views here that we can actually go to modify those views. So you can actually see right out of the box we get quite a number of views for this particular list. And then we've got the navigation that we can move back and forth if we've got paginated views. We can actually put some tags and notes on this list so we can actually see what's going on, help us understand what's there, give some additional information to our users if they want to see it. So we can actually put that in place. Email a link. If we're working on this, maybe we have someone who wants to review it, we can just send them a quick link there or get the full RSS feed, and we'll talk about how we can modify that RSS feed there. Because this is actually connected to, this actually has the knowledge about tasks and events, we can open it with Project. That integration is there. We can export it to Excel, which gives us a nice Excel format of whatever tasks we have in here. We don't have any yet. And then we can sync it to Outlook, and those events and tasks can pop up into Outlook, and we can use that on our desktop. And then this one is, you can see Open with Access. We actually don't have enough information right here to connect it with Access. We can customize the form. We can actually go through and modify the web parts that we see here because these are actually web parts. And we can do a quick step. So these are nice little ribbon buttons that your users can do to do different items. So we can actually put things into this ribbon on our own. And then we can actually go through and share with, so you have access with it. So you can do a quick permissions test. And then we can do workflow settings. What we're first going to go into right now is the list settings. And this should look familiar. This is your administrative tasks again that you can actually go through and see what's going on. You can see the list information, the name that I gave it, the address to it. I didn't give it a description. I didn't go into advanced, but we can go in and put that in place. Again, we've got our list name, description, and navigation. Do we want it on the quick launch or not? We're not showing it right now, but we can show it up on the quick launch. But we're going to add my description. And go ahead and save that. You can see now we've got a description. We can do versioning settings. If this is one of those pieces that you really do need to look at and understand. Right now, we're not doing content approval. We're not doing versioning because it's a task. If you're an organization that say, we would really like to know what has gone on with this task, find out what has changed with it, who has actually have an audit trail. We would like to go in and say, I want to keep at least 10 versions of this task. Now note that I'm saying 10 versions. These tasks are going to be fairly small, so that's not going to be a huge problem. If this was maybe a PowerPoint deck that had lots of video or graphics in it, that was 100 meg or maybe 200 meg in size, I probably would not want to do 10 versions. But on this one, we're doing a bit of an audit trail. So we can go back and see what happened. Then we're going to do 10. If I chose require approval, which I'm not going to, but in some, if you were in an organization that did SEI levels that you needed to have approval for change control board, you could turn this on, and actually the task could not be changed unless there was approval. And then we could keep drafts that were between approval versions. And then who should see the draft items on this list? Any user who can read can see that something's there, but it's in a draft state. You can actually say only users who can edit items can see this, or only users can approve items, and the author of the item can see things in draft. This is one of those things that gets a little confusing. If you remember earlier on, I was talking about the different permissions levels and different authentication levels. This is where who you are means that you can see very different views of this. Know that when you're working with your members and they have questions, it's always good to see what they're seeing, because sometimes you can get in a situation where you think that they have visibility and they don't. So we're going to go through and we're just going to take this. We're going to keep 10 versions of any task updates, and we're not going to need approval on that. Walk through advanced settings. We're going to allow management of content types. What that means is that we can actually add content types or remove them as well. Each one will be a new button to come into play. Each one has its own custom metadata. Note that if you have multiple content types on a list, you effectively have all of those. It's just filtering out the ones that are not applicable to whatever you're working with. So again, if you don't need it, don't drop it in. There is a cost associated with adding a content type, but this is one of those that you can actually allow people you can actually go in and say, yes, I want this list to be able to have multiple types of content. Maybe I've got a development task and I've got a documentation task, and I've taken those content types and expanded them out to that one. I can actually have multiple tasks in here, and I can actually categorize those, use that for different views, or actually gather different metadata associated with each one of those. We've got our read access. We can actually say read all items, which is what you normally will use with the list, but you can also choose read items that were created by the user. This is very valuable if you're actually working with a list that is say, a ticketing system, like I was mentioning, a IT request ticket, or maybe, I don't know, various different situations where you may want to do that. And you want to restrict your users to just seeing what they've entered into the queue. Now, this is just for users who can read and edit. For users who have the manage or contribute permissions, they can go in and see everything. So your people who are working the queue can see everything, but the people who can just come in and add an item into it, or maybe edit what they've already got, you can say you only get to see your items. This is a very useful task for working with lots of things. And then you can actually see what users can do with creating and edit. Create and edit all the items. Items just created by the user. So if you're just showing them the items that are created by them, then you probably want to do create items and edit only the ones of theirs. Or you can set up and say they don't have permissions to do that at all. So you can actually go through there and work with what you need. Attachments are enabled, so if you wanted to do supporting documentation and things like that, you can actually do attachments. Note this has a little side effect. I earlier put in the versioning that you could have that we wanted to keep up to 10 versions of each of the tasks. If I have attachments enabled, that could really blow up the size of storage for each one of these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say disabled, and I'll train my users that if they have an attachment, they would put a link to it to one of our libraries that we're going to put up in place. And allow items from this list to appear in search results. Yes, so people can search and find it in here. If it's something that you just didn't want to clutter up or something that shouldn't be there, you can turn that off. You can re-index the list at any time just to make sure it's always indexed correctly, and that's indexing off the columns. And then we've got the offline client availability. Should they be able to be downloaded to offline clients? This is what we looked at with the taskbar. We said, yes, it should be able to be pulled down to the appropriate offline clients, be that Outlook or Project or export it to Excel, and allow the list to be edited using Quick Edit. This allows you to basically come in just like a spreadsheet, fill down or put lots of information in very, very quickly. This also means you can change lots of things very quickly, and sometimes you do, sometimes you don't want that. And then launch forms in a dialog, so you can actually pop it out of the page and say, here's what's going on, and then drop back into the list itself. Just be aware that that doesn't always work, and that sometimes it plays a little havoc with if you're worried about pop-ups and things like that with your browser, that can cause some problems with this. So the safest place is to leave it in the page itself. And then you see I turned off attachments, so it's saying, if you turn this off, I'm going to get rid of all the attachments you may have had. That's fine right now, but it is warning you, so you've actually got a good heads up when things like this happen. Now we're going to go to validation settings. These are not commonly used, but it's something interesting. We can actually go, you see we've got our columns in here that we've got. These are all columns that we've got on the list. And we can actually say due date, and we want it to be, and we can actually say due date is greater than start date. So this would mean that if you tried to put something that's a due date that's earlier than the start date, it would give you an error. And we can actually give it this is something that we used to have to actually do with SharePoint event handlers. This is now you can just drop it right in here, very easily put something in place and do some validation so that once your data goes in, it's appropriate. It's actually doing some filtering on there to make sure everything's in place. We can actually do some audience targeting. If we turn on audience targeting, then we can say this SharePoint list is appropriate for certain people and not for other people. So we can actually say you as maybe a software developer, you get the software development list. A business person may get the process list. So you can actually turn that on and have that able to be focused on the web parts itself. I'm not going to do that right now, but that's the ability to make it pop up or hidden for different people. You can actually allow items to be rated. This is kind of the more social aspect of SharePoint. So you can actually go through and say, this is a good task or this was bad or whatever, and have the actual community that you're building with your site being able to say yes, no, maybe what's going on. You can actually do, when you do that, you can actually just do a simple, the thumbs up that we all know about, or we can actually do star ratings. So they can actually give a little bit more granular detail on that. I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. I'm going to say we're going to do star ratings, and we'll be able to say that's a great task or that's kind of sucks and you need to try again kind of thing. And then we actually have the form settings, which says we can actually, if we go through this, we can use InfoPath to customize the form. I don't recommend you do this, mainly because don't get too used to InfoPath. This is probably the last generation we'll see it. There's some of those technologies that are coming into play that are going to be still used, but we are not expecting to see the current way of doing things moving forward. So if you kind of don't build up too many dependencies today, you'll have an easier time when we get the next version of SharePoint and we get to know what's going to be following on from InfoPath. We've got our standard delete this list. Save the list as a template, which is exactly how we did it with saving the site as a template. We can actually customize the permissions right here. So we can actually go through and say who has different permissions. Go ahead and put that in specifically. We're inheriting it from the parent. If you remember, I was talking about how you inherit that. If you want to change it from here, then you need to break that inheritance and do some customization there. We've got our workflow settings, in which we can actually go through. We've actually got no workflows in place. We can actually add a workflow, and you can see we're going to run it on this list or anything on the list or just a task. And we've got two out-of-the-box workflows that we can actually do. A 3-state, which is basically going through and doing approval. Let's do a something just very, very simple. We've got selecting our task list, and this is going to be the tasks for our tasks, which is kind of interesting, but it will be a new task list created for this workflow. So it'll track it off this task, and then we'll actually have a workflow history that can come into place. We can allow this workflow to be manually started by anyone with edit item permissions, or we can say require manage list permissions to start the workflow. So we can actually say, yeah, you can kick it off if you've got permissions to edit, then you can start the workflow on what you've done. Or we can say, no, you've got to have a little bit higher level, and creating a new item will start this workflow. I'm going to leave that off because we want to be able to do some modifications before it, but you can actually say right when it goes, kick it off. It makes things a little simpler if you're used to that. And then changing an item will start this workflow. We can actually say that anytime you change it, it's got to go back through this workflow. And we've got our priority, our state, normal, high, low. We've got our task details. When you send out that information for the next person, the workflow is initiated, what the task is, the message, you can do things there, include the description, include a link to it, include the field to due date. We can actually say if it modified, when it was modified or created, and include assign to. We'll send it to. And then we've got our review task, initiated review task, which you can see the same things in here. And then we do our OK. And now we've got a workflow set up. So when we go in and put our pieces in, we can actually, our tasks in, we can actually kick off a review and get them approved. We've got a file plan report that we can generate. This just basically gives you the details on what's going on the list itself. We can actually pull in the enterprise metadata. We can add enterprise keyword column to this. This is basically if you've got someone doing that for you. Then you can actually do synchronization between what the keywords are you have here and what's going on with your enterprise. Right now we're not doing that, so we won't turn that on, but know that if you've got a group that handles that for you, that's available. And then information management policy settings. We can actually go through, we've got our task, and we've got our descriptions, our policy, and this is where we can turn on that retention, make sure the auditing is happening for this, and we'll go ahead and say we'll enable the auditing. We don't want to worry about barcodes. We want to see if anybody is opening it, adding it, moving or copy, or deleting or restoring. And we don't want to worry about barcodes or labels, so we go through and put that in place. We've got our management here. And then I was mentioning RSS settings, where we can go through, we say allow it. We can actually have our basic definitions are not too bad. We've got our image that we can do to put that into place. And you see that we've got our standard columns that are being put inside this RSS feed. So we can actually say, you don't need to know about the rating. You don't need to know about well, all the rest of those are probably pretty important, but we might want to say who created it and when it was modified. And now we've got that in place. We can actually pull that off of our RSS. Maximum of 25 items. We can actually expand that out. Be careful about that, though. Things get very large pretty quickly. And maximum days to include. So if nothing's really changed in the past 7 days, you won't see much in there. So we'll go through and put that in place. And then we've got our content types. You can actually see we just have our task. We can add from existing site types, and we can change things around and choose the default. So if we wanted to do subtasks off of this, we would actually go to our site content types, add a different content type in there, and then be able to sort them around so you could have your default on what you needed at that point. So And then we actually see our columns in here. So we can actually see what's going on, what's that. We've got number, person or group, calculated column on completed based on the other columns. We can actually go through and see when you click on the column itself, it shows you how it's computed, what the formula is, and what you have in place here. So you can actually go with all the columns, add some calculations in there. We can go through and see we've got our description, our date time, and all our details there. And let's go through, and we've kind of seen those. Let's add another column. Let's say this column will be, we're going to make it a nice choice. We do some lookups here. Note we have lookup here, which is very nice for pulling information from other locations. We got task outcome that can come into place. We can pull in external data, manage metadata, but we're going to do something nice and simple as choice. We're going to do our description is we will require that there is information. We will not enforce unique values. We'll give it we won't give it checkboxes, so we can say multiple items should be able to have it. We're not going to allow fill-in choices because we really want it to be in place. And we can actually say our default choice, default value is, say, we're going to add it all content types. So we can actually just put this to one. We only have one, so that's the same as adding it to all, and add to the default view so they can actually see it and modify it. So now we actually have our new item in here. Department affected, choice, used in task. We can add from existing site columns or see what our index columns are. You can see we only have parent ID. We can actually create a new index. And what this does is it makes things pretty easy to come into place and find it. We're actually going to do a index on the task status. So we can come in and say, let's see everything in the current status. So it makes things pretty easy. It'll go through. We can have up to 20 indexes, and that gives us things that have large number of columns, an easy way to find that data. And then we actually have our views down here. We actually have a default view of all tasks. It's available as a mobile view. You note we've got the Gantt chart and calendar, which are not. And then we've got our default mobile view as all tasks. This is actually when your browser comes in and reports it as a mobile browser, it gives a simplified view off of that. Of course, your browser can ask for the full experience as well. So you can actually go through and see what you want to do. We want to do completed. Let's take a look at this view here. And these are all things you remember across the top we were able to modify. We've actually got the ASPX here that we're going to be taking a look at. We can make it to our view. Let's actually see a departments affected. Let's put our new column on there. We can sort by the created date. And then as a secondary item, we'll sort by the last modified. We've got our filter here, which says only where percent complete is greater than or equal to 100, which means it should be complete. We can actually do our individual items, so we can actually do the tabular. We can actually do group by, so we can actually put those in as if we wanted department levels or things like that. We can actually create totals. We can actually do the totals off of that, so we can actually say we want to do a count of tasks. We can actually go through and give us, we got our default, but we can do box, newsletter, we've got all kinds of different things there. Completed items as struck through, so we can say things that are completed are gone. We kind of are only showing those, but that's fine. This is where we can actually drill out if there's any folders in your lists. We can actually do show all items without folders, or show everything inside and show it in the top level, or show it in any particular content type. So when I was mentioning the content types and the folders, remember that content types are kind of implemented as folders inside of lists. So you'll actually see when it's saying which folder, that content type does count as for that, and you can actually go through and make that happen. We've got our item limit of 100, and then we'll do batches, or we can do the total number of items returned to this account, and they can't really go any farther forward. So the batches are generally good. There's often a lot of discussion about, hey, my guys need to be able to have 3,000 items at a time. And my question to that always is, so what would they do with 3,000 items on a web page? Generally, if they're looking for things that large, you want them to synchronize it with like Excel or some of the desktop clients. If you're looking at things in huge numbers in just a view, you're probably not looking at it right. So number of items display 100 is a decent performing. If you let that get up too high, you're going to actually have your site's going to look very slow, and people are going to be very unhappy about it. So this is one of those that keeping the default value or even turning it down a little bit is pretty valuable. And then we've got our mobile view. We can actually go through to the default mobile view, number of items display for this view. 3 may be a little bit small with today's screens. Let's go ahead and modify that to 10. And the field of display in the simple view is just completed. We actually may want to put task name with the link and change that up. So we've got that in place. Go ahead and save it. And now we've modified our view for that. And let's go back in. That's our views. We can create another view if we wanted to. When you go in and try and create a view, standard view, because we've got date information, we can do calendar view. We can do data sheet view, which is just simply like an Excel spreadsheet. We can do our Gantt view because we've got that. And then we've got a custom view in SharePoint Designer, which we'll talk about just in a little bit about going in with SharePoint Designer and actually working with the page. Or we can start with one of the views that are already there. So pretty simple. That's kind of a quick run through about your list, modifying it. Once you do that, you can save it as a template and move on from there. Now let's go take a look at a library and see what how similar that's going to be and what differences you're going to see. What you're going to notice is things are very, very similar to working with a list. And so we'll actually just kind of run through what's there and then dive into a couple of pieces on the views, which are the main things that are different. So let's go to our site contents. Let's add an app. And let's make it a document library, just to make it simple. My custom documents, now we've got them. And one thing you'll notice that it is if you click on the ellipses, you can actually see the settings, the about, and remove it. This is a quick way to go to our settings. And this is our all documents view. This is the same thing we had, such as the Gantt view or the calendar view in the lists. These are all just kind of custom ways of looking at the data in your list. Here, it's just customized to look like the files that you would have in a directory. So we've actually got our versioning settings, our name description, column default value settings, all of those kind of things we've got in here. Audience targeting, all the different details. This all looks very familiar because this is it is a list under the covers. We've actually got some different default columns, but as you go through, you'll see different ones themselves. You can actually order them the same way, just like we did before. But we actually have our all documents view. And this is one of those custom views like we had the Gantt charts on the task list. And let's go through and just, basically it's going through it, all items ASPX for the forms that's created. And then we've got all the details. We can actually go through here and just look at, it's basically exactly what we saw before. We got the style, which is basic table, the document details. These are, again, very, very familiar with the preview pane that gives us pieces there. So we've got a little bit different styles, but you'll see that just about everything, the folders, show items inside the folders, or show all items without folders, the item list the same. So this should look very, very familiar with you just because it is very familiar to you. What we'll do is we'll go in and we'll create a custom view. Let's start with our all documents. Note that because we have created times and we have some dates, we can actually do a get view that will actually take that document. We can do the calendar view. All of these, again, are very similar because under the covers, it's the same data structure. So we go to our create it from our all documents, and we're not going to make this as default, but what we are going to do is we're going to create this as a personal view. Just comment on personal views. They are extremely valuable for you as an owner to make a view that you can actually go through and monitor things very specifically to you. It's a view that not everybody needs to worry about. It may not be useful to everyone. It's got things that you're really interested in. But you can actually go through and put that in place. It only shows up for you. If you want to export it or create it as a template, you can do that as well. This is also something that you may want to work with while you're setting things up as personal, and then copy out the settings and put them onto a public view. So what we may want to do as a owner, we want to do the checkout comment and who's it checked out to, when it was created, what the file size is, because we don't know what's going on with that. If it's a folder, how many files are in that folder, and how many children are under there. So we can actually do that. And we'll put the version in. Just as a note, we actually have our name up here, but note that there are a couple of different ways you can do names. These are custom ways those columns can show it. So for use in forms, you can have it popped in or linked to the document, the name linked to the document with an edit menu. So if you just wanted it read only, you'd actually use the name instead of name linked to document with edit menu, and you could do that. You can also change out the order, and SharePoint will automatically reorder it for you. And so all the rest of this is pretty similar, so we'll just go through and say we've got our own custom view. We pop over, and now you can see that all documents does not have our custom columns, and now we actually have them on these, and we can sort by these, we can work with them in all our different ways. We can filter off of them and all that. But one of the other things you can do here is you can actually look at the library and look at the web parts, and we're going to look at just the display form. And this goes back to our main default, and you can see that we can actually go through and work with our alerts, do the home pages, things like that. We can actually go in and insert just text in here. And I've got this here. I actually want to drop it below. Just a second, sometimes it gets kind of fun. And it's content editor, and we can go in, so we've got our information there that we can just add some text in. Let's add another web part. We can actually go in. You can see that we've just got tons of different web parts that we've got in place. Your organization may actually add even more. We've got our templates in here, our different site pages, our microfeeds, project files, all manner of items that we actually can come in here. Roll-ups of categories, properties, timelines, blah, blah, blah. There's a huge amounts of things you can do in here. Be used to it. Get familiar with this. One of the other items is with your web part, you can actually do connected web parts, because there are web parts that actually allow inbound connections and outbound connections in both. You can actually have a connection that says provide, when the user clicks on one of the documents, it can provide that document information, that row in the list, over to another web part that can do something to it. So you can actually pass those back and forth. You can actually go in and edit the information on the web part itself, give it some different information. Again, this is something that you can dig in pretty deep on and do some interesting things with. But for most of what you're going to use, just knowing it's there is the main thing. So we'll go in, we'll stop editing. We'll go back to our all documents, to my view, and we don't have anything here, so we're not seeing the details, but we can actually go through and do all kinds of modifications there.